Welcome to the Cheating Diaries channel. I was in the middle of a late-night project, my laptop humming quietly on the kitchen table, when my phone buzzed. It was Kendra. A quick glance at the clock told me it was already past 9. She should have been home by now, or at least on her way. My heart skipped a beat as I picked up the phone. There was something off in her voice, a tremor that I hadn't heard in years. "Hey, Jason," she said, her tone unusually soft, almost cautious. "I'm sorry, but I have to stay late at the shop tonight. We got a last-minute rush job, and it's all hands on deck." I frowned, the unease growing in my chest. "A rush job? At this hour?" "Yeah, it's one of those things. The customer is really pushing to have it done by tomorrow morning. I'll be home as soon as I can." She hung up before I could ask any more questions, leaving me staring at the darkened screen. It wasn't the first time Kendra had stayed late at work. Her job at the repair shop often required her to put in extra hours, especially when something urgent came up. But something about tonight felt different. There was a nervous edge to her voice, like she was trying too hard to sound casual. I shook off the unease, telling myself I was being paranoid. Kendra was dedicated to her work, and that's one of the things I loved about her. But as I went back to my project, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The hours ticked by, and Kendra still wasn't home. Finally, around midnight, I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I closed my laptop and waited, my eyes fixed on the door. When she walked in, she looked exhausted, her hair disheveled and her clothes rumpled. But there was something else in her eyes, something that made my stomach twist. "Hey," she said, forcing a smile. "Sorry I'm so late." "No worries," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Tough night?" "Yeah, you could say that." She brushed past me, heading straight for the bathroom. I watched her go, my mind racing. It was the first time in our marriage that I felt truly disconnected from her. There was a wall between us, one that I didn't know how to break down. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Kendra had always been an open book, but now she seemed distant, like she was hiding something. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what I might find. So I kept silent, hoping that it was all just a misunderstanding, that the tension between us would fade with time. But deep down, I knew that our lives were about to change, in ways I couldn't even imagine. The next few weeks passed in a blur, and that uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Kendra continued to stay late at the shop, and when she was home, she seemed distracted, always on her phone or lost in her thoughts. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that she was just stressed from work, but the doubts gnawed at me. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. Kendra's phone, which she usually kept within arm's reach, was nowhere to be seen. I glanced at the table, then at her, but she was too engrossed in her food to notice my scrutiny. "Where's your phone?" I asked casually, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, startled, then forced a smile. "Oh, I left it in the car. I needed a break from it, you know?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. Kendra never left her phone behind. She was always texting, checking emails, or scrolling through social media. The fact that she had suddenly decided to leave it in the car seemed suspicious. After dinner, I waited until Kendra went upstairs to take a shower, then slipped outside to her car. The phone was sitting on the passenger seat, just as she'd said, but when I picked it up, it was locked with a new passcode. My heart sank. Kendra had never kept secrets from me, and now she was locking her phone. I stood there in the driveway, the cold night air biting at my skin, as the realization began to sink in. Something was definitely wrong. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I decided to keep a closer eye on her, to see if there were any other signs that I had missed, and it wasn't long before I found them. Kendra started coming home later and later, always with the same excuse: a last-minute job at the shop, an urgent repair that couldn't wait until morning. But there was something else too. She had become increasingly secretive about her schedule, never telling me when she'd be home or where she was going after work. One day, while she was in the shower, I decided to check her coat pockets. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her trust, but I had to know the truth. My hands trembled as I reached into the pocket of her coat, and my fingers brushed against something crumpled. It was a receipt from a restaurant I had never heard of, dated just a few days ago. My heart pounded as I stared at the receipt, the reality of the situation hitting me like a ton of bricks. Kendra had been lying to me. She wasn't staying late at the shop. She was going out to dinner, and she hadn't told me. I sat down on the bed, the receipt clutched in my hand, as the anger and betrayal washed over me. My mind raced with questions. Who was she with? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why hadn't she told me the truth? But no matter how many times I replayed the events in my head, I couldn't find the answers. All I knew was that my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for so many years, was hiding something from me. The days following my discovery were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. I couldn't bring myself to confront Kendra, not yet. I needed more evidence, something concrete that would confirm my worst fears. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started following her. I hated myself for it, but the need to know the truth outweighed everything else. Every time Kendra said she had to stay late at the shop, I would wait a few minutes, then drive over to see if her car was there. More often than not, it wasn't. One night, I followed her after work, careful to keep a safe distance so she wouldn't notice me. She drove across town, her car moving through the streets with a sense of purpose that made my heart pound. Eventually, she pulled into the parking lot of a small, upscale restaurant, the same one from the receipt I had found in her coat pocket. I parked a few spaces away, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched her get out of the car. She looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, before walking inside. My heart raced as I waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. And then I saw him. A man, tall and well-dressed, emerged from the restaurant a few minutes after Kendra. He glanced around just as she had before heading inside. I couldn't see his face clearly from where I was parked, but I recognized the way he moved, the confidence in his stride. It was Tom. Tom was a regular at the repair shop, a charming businessman who always seemed to need something fixed. I had met him a few times when I dropped by the shop to see Kendra, and we had exchanged pleasantries. I never thought much of him. He was just another customer as far as I was concerned. But now, watching him walk into that restaurant after my wife, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal that threatened to consume me. This was the man she had been seeing behind my back, the one she had been lying to me about. I wanted to storm into the restaurant, to confront them both, to demand an explanation. But I knew that wouldn't get me the answers I needed. Instead, I waited, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios. When Kendra finally left the restaurant, it was almost midnight. She got into her car and drove away, completely unaware that I had been watching. I followed her home, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, the distance between us felt like a chasm. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes without seeing her with Tom, laughing, smiling, sharing a meal that should have been with me. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. The truth was out there, just beyond my reach, and I had to find it. But the question that haunted me was whether I was ready to face what I might uncover. The next morning, I made a decision. I would confront Kendra, but not yet. I needed to gather more evidence, to make sure I had all the facts before I accused her of anything. So I decided to install a camera in our home, something discreet that she wouldn't notice. It felt wrong, invasive, but I couldn't think of any other way to get to the truth. As I set up the camera, my hands shaking with nerves, I couldn't help but wonder how we had ended up here. We had been so happy once, so in love, but now it felt like that happiness had been built on a foundation of lies, and I didn't know if we could ever rebuild what we had lost. I finished setting up the camera, then sat down on the bed, staring at the blank wall in front of me. I knew that the days ahead would be some of the hardest of my life, but I also knew that I couldn't keep living in the dark. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Every moment Kendra and I spent together felt like a performance, as if we were both pretending everything was normal when, in reality, the ground beneath us was crumbling. I continued to follow her, gathering every bit of evidence I could without tipping her off. It was exhausting, living with this secret, but I knew that if I didn't find the truth, it would destroy me. The camera I had installed at home became my lifeline, my way of keeping tabs on her when I couldn't be there in person. I checked the footage religiously, every night after she went to bed. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the normal routine of her coming home late, making a quick dinner, and then retreating to our bedroom. But I knew better than to be complacent. I kept watching, knowing that eventually she would slip up. And then, one night, it happened. It was a Tuesday, a day like any other, but when I reviewed the footage from earlier that evening, my heart nearly stopped. Kendra had come home around 7 p.m., earlier than usual. She moved through the house with an air of nervous energy, pacing back and forth in the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone. My stomach churned as I watched her finally settle on the couch, her eyes fixed on her phone. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Kendra jumped up, a look of fear crossing her face before she quickly composed herself. She took a deep breath, then went to answer the door. The camera didn't catch the entryway, but I didn't need to see who it was to know. A moment later, Kendra and Tom appeared on screen, standing awkwardly in the middle of our living room. My living room. Tom was holding a bouquet of flowers, which he handed to Kendra with a nervous smile. She took them, her expression softening as she inhaled their scent. Then, without another word, she leaned in and kissed him. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The image of them together, so intimate in my own home, made my blood boil. I wanted to smash the screen, to tear down the camera and pretend that none of this was happening, but I forced myself to keep watching. They sat down on the couch, their bodies close, their voices low. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way they looked at each other told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just having an affair, they were in love, or at least they thought they were. Tom reached out, taking Kendra's hand in his, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes as if she were finally at peace. It was a sight I hadn't seen in years. The realization hit me like a truck. She hadn't looked at me that way in a long time. I felt sick. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I watched them together, their whispers and touches filling the silence of my empty house. I couldn't bear to watch any longer. I shut off the screen and buried my face in my hands, trying to keep the anger and heartbreak from overwhelming me. This was it. This was the truth I had been searching for, and now that I had found it, I wished I hadn't. My wife, the woman I had loved for years, was in love with someone else, and she had brought him into our home, into the very heart of our life together, without a second thought. As I sat there in the dark, the weight of the situation pressing down on me, I knew that I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living this lie, hoping that things would somehow go back to the way they were. I had to confront Kendra, had to make her face what she had done. But how could I do that when the mere thought of it made my chest tighten with pain? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, their bodies entwined on the couch, the love in their eyes that should have been reserved for me. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. I would confront Kendra that evening after she came home from work. I would lay everything out on the table and demand the truth. I didn't know what would happen after that. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw her out of the house and tell her to never come back. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, was desperate for some kind of resolution, some way to salvage what we had lost. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. I spent the day in a fog, unable to focus on anything except the confrontation that awaited me. Finally, as evening approached, I heard the sound of Kendra's car in the driveway. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it. There was no turning back now. Kendra walked through the door, her usual forced smile plastered on her face. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness that had become all too familiar. But there was something else, too, an undercurrent of tension, as if she knew something was coming. Maybe she sensed the shift in me, the resolve that had settled into my bones. I watched her as she set her bag down, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look at me, not directly, and I wondered if she was avoiding my gaze on purpose. It was now or never. I had to do this, no matter how much it hurt. "Kendra," I said, my voice betraying the turmoil inside me. She froze, her back still turned to me. "Yes?" she replied, her tone cautious. "I know about Tom." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, there was only silence, a void where everything we had built was beginning to crumble. Then slowly, Kendra turned to face me, her expression a mix of shock and fear. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't lie to me, Kendra," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. "I've seen the footage. I know about the flowers, the dinners, the time you've spent with him. I know you've been lying to me." Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, as if the truth had physically struck her. "Jason, I can explain." I held up a hand to stop her. "No more lies. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Kendra hesitated, her eyes filling with tears as she struggled to find the words. "It started a few months ago," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." The anger I had been holding back broke free, and I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. "It just happened? How the hell does something like this just happen, Kendra? You don't just fall into an affair. You made a choice." She flinched at my words, the guilt and shame etched into every line of her face. "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I made a mistake, Jason, but it's not as simple as you think." "Not as simple?" I echoed, my voice rising in disbelief. "You're cheating on me, Kendra. You're lying to me every single day. How is that not simple?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. I never wanted to hurt you, but things between us, they haven't been right for a long time." Her words cut through me like a knife. I had known that our marriage wasn't perfect, that we had drifted apart over the years, but hearing her say it out loud was like a punch to the gut. "So what? You decided to replace me with Tom? Is that it?" "No," she cried, her voice filled with desperation. "It's not like that. Tom, he's not you, Jason. He's not a replacement. He's someone I connected with when I felt like I had no one else." The pain in her voice was palpable, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or understanding, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger and betrayal that had taken root in my heart. "So what now?" I asked, my voice cold. "Are you going to leave me for him?" Kendra looked away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I couldn't take it anymore. The pain, the confusion, the sheer weight of the betrayal was too much to bear." I turned away from her, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. "I need you to leave," I said, my voice hoarse. "Jason, please," she begged, reaching out to touch my arm. But I pulled away, the hurt too raw, too deep. "Just go, Kendra. I can't do this right now." She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering in the air before she finally let it drop to her side. With one last tearful look, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage of our marriage. As the door closed behind her, the silence that followed was deafening. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, threatening to pull me under, but I couldn't afford to give in to it. Not yet. There were too many questions, too many unresolved feelings. I needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of pain and numbness. I felt like I was living in a daze, going through the motions of my life without really being present. The house felt empty, a hollow shell of the life Kendra and I had once shared. Every room, every piece of furniture, every little detail reminded me of her, of us, of what we had lost. I avoided talking to anyone, not wanting to explain what had happened, not wanting to face the pity or the judgment. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to make sense of the mess that my life had become. All I could do was try to keep going, to put one foot in front of the other, even if it felt like I was walking through quicksand. I hadn't heard from Kendra since the night she left. Part of me was relieved, not ready to face her or the reality of what we were going through. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, was desperate for some kind of contact, some reassurance that we could find a way through this. I knew I should hate her. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, shattered the trust that had been the foundation of our marriage. But as much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't. All I felt was a deep, aching sadness, a grief for the life we had lost, the future we would never have. I spent hours replaying the last few months in my head, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything had started to fall apart. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a single cause, a single moment that had led us to this point. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. No matter how many times I rearranged the fragments, the picture never fully came together. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay in the house, not anymore. Every time I walked through the door, I felt like I was being suffocated by the memories, by the ghost of the life I had once lived. I needed to get out, to find somewhere I could think, somewhere I could breathe. I packed a bag with the essentials, clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and left without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a plan, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to put some distance between myself and the pain that was threatening to consume me. I drove for hours, the city giving way to countryside as I left everything behind. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to escape, to find some kind of solace in the open road. The miles blurred together, the landscape passing in a haze as I tried to outrun the thoughts that were chasing me. Finally, as night began to fall, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. It was the kind of place I would never have considered staying at before, a run-down, forgotten relic of a bygone era. But in that moment, it felt like exactly what I needed, a place to disappear, to lose myself in the anonymity of a nowhere town. The room was as shabby as I had expected, faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, a threadbare carpet, and a bed that creaked ominously when I sat down. But it was quiet, and that was all that mattered. I didn't need luxury or comfort. I just needed a place where I could be alone with my thoughts. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall in front of me, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I had left everything behind, my home, my life, my marriage, but I didn't feel any lighter. The weight of what had happened still pressed down on me, a constant reminder that there was no escaping the truth. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a moment before scrolling through my contacts to Kendra's name. My finger hovered over the call button, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't call her, knew that it would only open up wounds that were still too fresh. But the need to hear her voice, to find some kind of closure, was too strong to ignore. I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear, my breath catching as it rang. One ring, then two, then three. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer, and a wave of relief washed over me. But then, just as I was about to hang up, I heard her voice. "Hello?" The sound of her voice, so familiar and yet so distant, sent a jolt through me. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to start this conversation. For a moment, I just sat there in silence, listening to her breathing on the other end of the line. "Jason?" she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Kendra," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, a silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she finally spoke. "Are you okay?" I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question, but all I could do was shake my head even though she couldn't see me. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm not okay, Kendra. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again." Her breath hitched, and I could hear the tears in her voice when she replied, "I'm so sorry, Jason. I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, the anger I had been trying to suppress finally breaking free. "Why did you do this to us?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. "I wish I could tell you, but I don't have an answer. All I know is that I messed up, and I don't know how to fix it." I closed my eyes, the pain in her voice only adding to my own. "I don't think we can fix this, Kendra. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." The silence that followed was deafening, a void that neither of us knew how to fill. Finally, Kendra spoke, her voice barely audible. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we can't fix this. But I want you to know that I love you, Jason. I never stopped loving you." Her words felt like a knife to my heart, cutting through the anger and leaving only the raw, unfiltered pain. "Then why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you have to go and ruin everything?" "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do is tell you that I'm sorry and that I'll always love you, no matter what." I couldn't take it anymore. The pain, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of loss. It was too much. I ended the call, dropping the phone onto the bed as I buried my face in my hands. The tears came then, hot and unrelenting, the dam finally breaking as I let out all the grief and anger I had been holding in. I didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if I would ever be able to move past this. But in that moment, all I could do was let the tears fall, let the pain wash over me, and hope that somehow, someday, I would find a way to heal. After days of isolation, I realized that running away hadn't brought me any peace. The motel room that had initially felt like a refuge had turned into a prison, trapping me with my thoughts and my pain. The emptiness around me only amplified the emptiness I felt inside. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, wallowing in self-pity and anger. I had to return to face the reality I had tried to escape. The drive back to the city was somber. I took the long way, winding through back roads and small towns, trying to prolong the inevitable. But no matter how many detours I took, the destination was always the same. I couldn't avoid my life any longer. When I finally pulled into the driveway of our home, my home now, the sight of the familiar house stirred a mixture of dread and nostalgia in me. The last time I'd been there, everything had fallen apart. I wasn't sure what I expected to find when I walked through the door. The house was quiet, just as I had left it. Kendra wasn't there. I hadn't told her I was coming back, and part of me was relieved. I needed to be alone, to reacquaint myself with the place that had once been a sanctuary, but had since become a battlefield of emotions. I wandered through the rooms, each one filled with memories that now felt tainted. The living room where we used to curl up on the couch and watch movies. The kitchen where we had shared countless meals and conversations. All of it felt foreign, as if the life we had lived here belonged to someone else. My footsteps echoed in the empty space, and for the first time I understood what people meant when they talked about a house being haunted. It wasn't ghosts or spirits that haunted me, but the memories of what had been and what had been lost. I eventually found myself in the bedroom, the bed still unmade from the last night I had spent there. The sight of it brought a fresh wave of pain, but also a strange sense of resolve. This was my life, and I couldn't keep running from it. If I was ever going to heal, I had to face it head on. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind churning with thoughts and questions. Where did we go from here? Was there even a we anymore? The truth was, I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I had to make a decision, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. A few days after returning home, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation with Tom. As much as I hated him for what he had done, I needed to hear his side of the story, to understand why he had betrayed me in such a personal and devastating way. I wasn't sure how to reach out to him, but fate had a way of making decisions for me. One evening, as I was leaving the grocery store, I spotted him across the parking lot. He was alone, leaning against his car, looking lost in thought. I felt a surge of anger and pain, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was my chance to get some answers, and I wasn't going to waste it. "Tom," I called out, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He looked up, his expression one of surprise and guilt. For a moment, he seemed to consider getting in his car and driving away. But then he sighed and walked over to me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Jason," he said quietly, unable to meet my eyes, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to see you either," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "But now that we're here, I think we need to talk." He nodded, his gaze finally meeting mine. "I suppose we do." We stood there in the fading light, the tension between us palpable. I could see the guilt etched into his face, but it did little to soften the anger I felt. "Why?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me since the moment I found out. "Why did you do it, Tom? You were my friend. How could you betray me like that?" Tom winced at the word betray, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "I don't have a good answer for you, Jason. I wish I did. I wish I could say there was some reason, some excuse, but there isn't. I messed up. I let my feelings for Kendra get the better of me, and I crossed a line I should never have crossed." "Feelings?" I scoffed, my anger flaring up again. "You're talking about feelings? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To our friendship?" "I know," he said, his voice filled with regret, "and I'll never forgive myself for it. But you have to understand, Jason, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. It got out of control." "Out of control," I echoed, my voice rising. You call destroying my marriage and our friendship out of control? He didn't respond right away, his silence only fueling my anger. But when he finally spoke, his voice was broken. I know there's nothing I can say to make this right. I betrayed you, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that I never wanted to take Kendra away from you. I never wanted to replace you. It just happened. His words echoed Kendra's, and I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. It just happened seemed to be the mantra of cheaters everywhere, as if that absolved them of responsibility. But I could see the sincerity in Tom's eyes, the genuine regret and pain. He wasn't just trying to make excuses. He was trying to explain the inexplicable. I don't know what to do with this, Tom, I said, my voice heavy with resignation. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, or if I even want to. He nodded, accepting my words without protest. I understand, and I won't ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But for whatever it's worth, I'm sorry, Jason. Truly, deeply sorry. I wanted to lash out, to tell him that his apologies meant nothing, that they couldn't undo the damage he had caused. But the anger that had sustained me for so long was beginning to wane, leaving behind only exhaustion. I need time, I finally said, my voice softening. I need time to figure out what comes next, for all of us. Tom nodded again, his expression one of quiet acceptance. Take all the time you need, and if you ever want to talk, or if there's anything I can do to make this right, just let me know. I didn't respond, unsure if there was anything left to say. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving Tom standing alone in the parking lot, the weight of our broken friendship hanging between us. Returning home after the conversation with Tom felt like walking into a void. The house seemed even emptier, the silence heavier. I had sought answers, but instead of clarity, I was left with more questions, more doubts. I kept asking myself how everything had gone so wrong, how I had missed the signs that my life was falling apart. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a satisfying answer. I spent the next few days in a fog, barely able to focus on anything. My job became a blur of meetings and tasks that I completed on autopilot. My mind was constantly elsewhere, replaying every interaction with Kendra and Tom, trying to piece together the puzzle of our broken relationships. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the answers I was searching for weren't just about them. They were about me, too. How had I let things get so bad? How had I allowed myself to become so distant from the woman I had once loved with all my heart? The truth was, I had been blind. I had been so caught up in my own life, my own concerns, that I had failed to see what was happening right in front of me. And now, I was paying the price for that blindness. One evening, as I sat in the living room staring blankly at the television, I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep wallowing in self-pity, waiting for some miracle to fix everything. I had to take action, had to make decisions, even if they were painful. I needed to figure out what I wanted, what I needed, and how to move forward. The first step was to confront Kendra again. Our last conversation had ended in anger and tears. But I couldn't let that be the final word. We needed to talk, really talk, about what had happened and what we were going to do next, whether we had any chance of salvaging our marriage, or if it was time to let go. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for her to answer. When she finally did, her voice was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure what to expect. "Jason?" she said, her tone cautious. "We need to talk, Kendra," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you come over tonight?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, I'll be there in an hour." When she arrived, the tension between us was palpable. We sat down in the living room, facing each other like adversaries in a battle neither of us wanted to fight. For a few moments, neither of us spoke, the silence thick with unspoken words. "I've been thinking," I finally said, breaking the silence. "About everything, about us." Kendra nodded, her expression guarded. And I still don't know what to do," I admitted. "I'm angry, Kendra, I'm hurt, but I also know that we can't keep avoiding this. We need to decide what happens next." She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know, and I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry for everything." Sorry isn't enough, I said, my voice harsher than I intended. I need to know why, Kendra. Why did you do this? Why did you betray me? Her eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. I wish I had an answer. I wish I could tell you that there was some reason, some explanation that would make it all make sense. But I can't. All I can say is that I messed up. I made a terrible mistake, and now we're both paying the price. I felt a pang of sadness at her words, the weight of our situation pressing down on me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said softly. But I need to know if there's anything left to save. If we can even try to fix this. Kendra looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. I want to try, Jason. I know it won't be easy, and I know I have no right to ask for a second chance. But I love you. I've always loved you. And if there's any part of you that still loves me, I want to try to make this work. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than anger and pain. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in that direction. A small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was long and uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles that we would have to face together. And even then, there were no guarantees. But in that moment, I realized that I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. There was still a part of me that wanted to fight for what we had, to try to rebuild the life we had once shared. I don't know if we can fix this, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. But I'm willing to try, if you are. Kendra nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I am. I want to try, Jason. I want to make things right. As we sat there staring at each other across the divide that had grown between us, I knew that the path to healing would be long and difficult. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward, together. Forgiving Kendra wasn't something I could do overnight. The betrayal had cut deep, and the wounds were still fresh. Every time I looked at her, I saw the memories of our life together, but they were overshadowed by the image of her with Tom. It was like a stain that wouldn't wash out no matter how hard I tried to scrub it away. But we were both committed to trying. We went through the motions, talking about mundane things, trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. But the weight of what had happened hung over us like a dark cloud, always threatening to rain down on us when we least expected it. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed next to her, I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking about him. Every time she reached for me, I hesitated, my mind replaying images I didn't want to see. The intimacy we once shared felt tainted, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to feel close to her again. But I kept going, kept trying to find a way forward. I had made a commitment to her, and I wasn't ready to break that vow, even if it felt like she already had. I told myself that love was supposed to be stronger than anything else, that it could withstand even the most painful of betrayals. But there were moments when I wasn't sure if that was true. Kendra was patient with me, understanding that I needed time. She didn't push, didn't demand anything from me, but I could see the pain in her eyes, the guilt that weighed on her every time we were together. It was a constant reminder of what had happened, and I knew that we couldn't go on like this forever. One evening, after another strained dinner, I decided we needed to talk about it again. We had been avoiding the subject, hoping that time would somehow make it easier. But time wasn't healing the wounds. It was only making the silence between us more unbearable. Kendra, I said, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room, we need to talk. She looked up at me, her expression tense, as if she was bracing herself for another argument. I know, she said softly. What do you want to talk about? I can't keep pretending that everything's okay, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. Because it's not, and I don't know how to move forward if we don't address what happened. She nodded, her eyes downcast. I understand. And I'm sorry, Jason. I know I've hurt you in ways that words can't fix. But I don't know what to do to make it better. I don't know how to help you heal. I don't know either, I admitted, feeling the frustration rise in me. But I do know that ignoring it isn't working. We need to be honest with each other about how we feel, about what we want. Kendra looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I want to make this work, Jason. I want to find a way to heal, to rebuild what we had. But I don't know if you can ever forgive me, and I don't blame you if you can't. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I want to forgive you, Kendra. I really do. But every time I try, I feel like I'm betraying myself, like I'm letting go of my own pain too easily. And I don't know how to balance that. She reached across the table and took my hand, her touch warm but hesitant. I know it's not something that can happen overnight, and I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes. But I need to know that you still want this, that you still want us. I looked into her eyes, seeing the desperation and hope there. It would have been easy to say no, to tell her that it was too much, that I couldn't do it. But deep down, I knew that I wasn't ready to give up on us. Not yet. There was still a part of me that believed in what we had, that wanted to fight for it, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I do, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I want us to work. But it's going to take time, Kendra, and I don't know how long it will be before I can fully trust you again. She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I'll wait, Jason. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I just need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. We sat there in silence for a long time, our hands still clasped together. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this darkness together. The days that followed our conversation were tentative, filled with small steps toward rebuilding what we had lost. It was like learning to walk again after a crippling injury, slow, painful, and full of uncertainty. But we were both committed to the process, even if we didn't always know what we were doing. Kendra suggested we see a marriage counselor, someone who could help us navigate the rocky terrain of our relationship. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of opening up to a stranger about our most intimate problems felt uncomfortable, almost invasive. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we needed help. We couldn't do this alone. Our first session was awkward. We sat on a couch in a small, dimly lit office, facing a middle-aged woman named Dr. Harris. She had a calm, soothing presence, and she listened patiently as we fumbled through our story, each of us struggling to find the right words. I'm glad you both decided to come here, Dr. Harris said after we had finished speaking. It takes a lot of courage to face your problems head-on, especially after something as painful as infidelity. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. It hasn't been easy. No, it rarely is, she agreed. But the fact that you're both here, willing to work through this, is a positive sign. It means that there's still something worth fighting for. Kendra squeezed my hand, and I glanced at her, seeing the hope in her eyes. She was right. As much as it hurt, there was still something worth fighting for. But the question was, how? Dr. Harris guided us through the process, helping us to communicate more openly, to express our feelings without fear of judgment or retaliation. She encouraged us to be honest, even when it was painful, and to listen to each other with empathy and understanding. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger and resentment flared up again, when the memories of what had happened threatened to tear us apart all over again. But each time, Dr. Harris was there to guide us back, to remind us of why we were doing this. One of the hardest parts was confronting my own role in what had happened. It was easy to place all the blame on Kendra, to see myself as the innocent victim in all of this. But the truth was more complicated. I had to face the fact that our marriage had been struggling long before the affair, that I had been distant, preoccupied with my own life, my own concerns. It's important to acknowledge your own feelings, Jason, Dr. Harris said during one session. But it's also important to recognize that both of you contributed to the state of your marriage. Infidelity is a symptom, not the cause of deeper issues. I nodded, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. It was hard to admit that I hadn't been the perfect husband, that I had made mistakes too. But it was also freeing in a way to let go of the need to be the victim, to take responsibility for my part in what had happened. Kendra, too, had to confront her own guilt, her own reasons for what she had done. It was painful for both of us, but it was also necessary. We couldn't move forward until we had faced the past, until we had laid it all out on the table and examined it together. As the weeks went by, we slowly began to rebuild. It wasn't a smooth process. There were setbacks, arguments, moments of doubt, but there were also small victories, moments when we felt closer than we had in a long time. We started to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place, to rediscover the things that had drawn us to each other all those years ago. We spent more time together, not just in counseling, but in our everyday lives. We went for walks, cooked meals together, and even laughed at old jokes that had once been a regular part of our lives. It wasn't the same as before. There was still a shadow hanging over us, a reminder of the pain we had been through, but it was a start. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Kendra leaned her head on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, something she had done countless times before, but this time it felt different. It felt like a step forward, a small but significant sign that we were healing, that we were beginning to trust each other again. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect. There was still a long way to go, but it was enough. Enough to make me believe that we could do this, that we could find a way to rebuild the life we had once shared. Just as it seemed that Kendra and I were finally starting to rebuild, a new shadow began to creep into our lives, one that neither of us had anticipated. It started as small things, little oddities that I might have overlooked if not for the fragile state of our marriage. Kendra began to receive calls at strange hours. She would step out of the room to answer them, her voice low and hurried. When I asked her who it was, she always had an explanation: a friend from work, her sister, someone who needed help with something minor. But the explanations never quite sat right with me. It wasn't just the calls, though. There were other signs, subtle changes in her behavior that made me uneasy. She started staying late at work more often, claiming that she had to catch up on paperwork or help out a colleague. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but given everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, I noticed her checking her phone more frequently than usual. She would glance at it, type something quickly, and then set it down, only to pick it up again a few minutes later. It was unlike her, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Kendra," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "is everything okay?" She looked up at me, startled, as if she hadn't realized I was watching her. "Yeah, everything's fine. Why?" "You just seem a little distracted," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Is there something you want to talk about?" She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen of her phone. "No, it's nothing, just work stuff." I nodded, but the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. I wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that we were past the worst of it, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't let me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. The next few days were tense. I tried to push the doubts aside, to remind myself that we were working on rebuilding trust, but it was hard. Every time her phone buzzed, or she mentioned staying late at work, the doubts crept back in, gnawing at me like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. I knew I needed to talk to her about it, to address the growing unease between us, but I was afraid of what I might hear. What if she was hiding something? What if we weren't as far along in our healing as I had thought? The fear of opening up that old wound again was almost paralyzing, but I couldn't let it fester. I knew that if I didn't confront it, the doubts would eat away at me, and we would be right back where we started. So one evening, after we had finished dinner, I decided to bring it up. "Kendra," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral, "can we talk?" She looked up at me, her expression wary. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I've noticed that you've been getting a lot of calls lately, and you've been staying late at work more often. I just wanted to make sure that everything's okay." She stiffened slightly, her eyes flicking away from mine. "It's just been busy at work. You know how it is." "I do," I said, nodding. "But it's been bothering me. After everything we've been through, it's hard not to worry." She sighed, setting down her fork. "Jason, I promise you, there's nothing to worry about. I'm just trying to do my job, to keep up with everything. I know it's been hard on us, but I'm not hiding anything from you." I wanted to believe her, but there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the suspicion. "Are you sure? Because if there's anything you need to talk about, anything at all, I want you to feel like you can tell me." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Was it guilt? Or was it simply exhaustion? "I'm sure, Jason. I'm not hiding anything. I want us to work too, but you have to trust me." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Trust was something I'd been struggling with ever since the affair, something that was easier to say than to actually do. But if we were going to make it, if we were going to rebuild our marriage, I knew I had to find a way to let go of the doubts. "I'm trying," I said, my voice quiet. "It's just hard after everything." She nodded, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know, and I'm sorry that I made it so hard for you to trust me. But I'm here, Jason. I'm not going anywhere." I squeezed her hand, trying to hold on to that reassurance, even as the doubts lingered in the back of my mind. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe everything really was just fine. But as I looked at her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows, something that could tear us apart all over again if I wasn't careful. And in that moment, I realized that the battle for our marriage wasn't over yet. The road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, with fears and doubts that would test us in ways I couldn't yet foresee. But as I looked at Kendra, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Just as I was starting to believe that things were truly getting better between us, the rug was pulled out from under me once more. It was a Wednesday evening, and Kendra had just returned home from another late night at the shop. She seemed distracted, almost jittery, as she moved around the house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had tried to push my suspicions aside, tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid after everything we had been through. But the doubts were like an itch that wouldn't go away, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. That night, after Kendra had gone to bed, I found myself unable to sleep. My mind kept racing, replaying every little thing that had seemed out of place over the past few weeks. The late-night phone calls, the texts she would quickly dismiss, the tension in her voice when I asked about her day. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I couldn't help myself. I quietly slipped out of bed and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. She had given me the password months ago, a gesture meant to rebuild trust. But now, that trust was hanging by a thread. As I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounded in my chest. Most of the conversations were mundane, with friends and colleagues. But then I found one thread that made my blood run cold. The contact was saved under a generic name, Jake, and the messages were short, cryptic, but undeniably flirtatious. My stomach churned as I read through them, each word like a dagger in my heart. There were references to meeting up, to missing our talks, and even a few messages that could only be described as outright suggestive. I felt like I was going to be sick. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. It was happening again. After everything we had been through, after all the work we had done to rebuild our marriage, she was doing it again. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I quietly put the phone back on the nightstand and returned to bed. But I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and anger and hurt. I couldn't believe this was happening again. Couldn't believe that after everything, she would do this to me. By the time morning came, I had made up my mind. I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I needed answers, and I needed them now. As Kendra was getting ready for work, I confronted her. "Kendra, we need to talk." She looked at me, her expression wary. "What's wrong, Jason?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw the messages on your phone, from Jake." "Care to explain?" Her face paled, and I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Fear, maybe guilt, but she quickly composed herself. "Jason, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because it looks a lot like you're doing exactly what you promised you wouldn't do." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, Jason, please. It's not what you think. Jake is just a friend, someone I talk to when I'm stressed. There's nothing going on between us." "Then why the secrecy? Why the late-night texts, the sneaking around?" I was practically shouting now, the anger boiling over. "After everything we've been through, you expect me to believe that?" She reached out to me, but I pulled away, too angry to be touched. "Jason, I'm sorry. I should have told you about him, but I was afraid you'd react exactly like this. There's nothing going on, I swear." But I didn't believe her. How could I? After everything that had happened, how could I trust anything she said? The doubt had already taken root, and it was poisoning everything. Kendra, I said, my voice cold. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep pretending that we're okay when we're clearly not. Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. Please, Jason, don't do this. I love you. I don't want to lose you. But I couldn't hear her over the sound of my own heart breaking. I need time to think, I said, turning away from her. I need to figure out what I want. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, sobbing. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that everything I thought I had rebuilt was crumbling around me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The hotel room was a refuge from the chaos of my thoughts. For the first few days, I just existed in a state of numbness, moving through the motions of daily life without truly engaging with it. I avoided calling Kendra, not out of malice, but because I needed to be sure of my own feelings before engaging with hers. One evening, as I sipped coffee in the small diner adjacent to the hotel, I decided to call Dr. Harris. I had tried to ignore the need for professional help, but the weight of my emotions was too heavy to bear alone. Dr. Harris, I said when she answered, my voice hoarse. I think I'm at a breaking point. She listened attentively as I poured out my frustrations and fears. I spoke about the messages I had found, the confrontation with Kendra, and the subsequent days of isolation and reflection. It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed and uncertain, Dr. Harris said gently. It's understandable given the situation. Betrayal is a heavy burden, and dealing with it requires time and reflection. I don't know if I can keep going through this, I admitted. It feels like I'm constantly revisiting the same pain. Recovery is rarely a linear process, she replied. There will be setbacks, but that doesn't mean you're not making progress. It's important to remember that you have options and that taking time for yourself is part of the healing process. I sighed, feeling a slight relief from her words. What should I do now? Focus on what you need to heal, she advised. It's okay to take time to make decisions. Think about what you want from this relationship and whether it's possible to rebuild trust. If you need to talk to Kendra, do so with honesty and openness. With that guidance, I made the decision to reach out to Kendra. I needed to face her and understand if there was a way forward for us. The following day, I returned to the house, the familiar environment both comforting and unsettling. Kendra was home, and when she saw me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. We sat in the living room, the space that had once been our sanctuary now feeling like a battleground. I've been thinking a lot, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. About us, about what's happened. Kendra nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I have too. I'm so sorry for everything, Jason. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right. I looked at her, searching for any sign of deceit but finding only raw emotion. I need to know why this happened again. Why couldn't we just move on? I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I've been struggling with feelings I didn't fully understand, and I made terrible choices. I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to make things right. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, but the pain was still too fresh for me to fully trust her assurances. I need to think about this. I need to understand if we can rebuild what we had. Kendra nodded, her expression a mix of sorrow and determination. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. As I left the house, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the confusion. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But I knew that the path would be fraught with challenges, and the decision would require careful consideration. The hotel room had become a place of contemplation, a space where I could try to piece together the fragments of my life. I spent my days reflecting on my conversations with Dr. Harris and my recent meeting with Kendra. I knew that I needed to make a decision, but the weight of that choice was nearly unbearable. One afternoon, I took a walk through a nearby park, trying to clear my mind. The sun was shining, and families were enjoying the day, but I felt a profound disconnect from the world around me. The clarity I sought seemed just out of reach. Back in the hotel, I decided it was time to confront the reality of my situation. I had to acknowledge my own feelings and desires, and that meant having another conversation with Kendra. I wanted to be sure that whatever decision I made was based on honesty and understanding. I called Kendra and arranged to meet her at the cafe once more. It was a place with memories of better times, and I hoped it might offer some clarity amidst the turmoil. When I arrived, Kendra was already there, waiting at our usual table. Her face was a canvas of anxiety and hope, and as I approached, she stood up to greet me. We sat down, and the silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, trying to steady my voice, "about what you said, about everything that's happened." Kendra's eyes were filled with a mix of fear and expectation. "I've been thinking too. I want to make this work, Jason. I want to fix what's broken." I could see the earnestness in her eyes, and it made me want to believe that we could overcome this. "I need to understand why this happened again. What are we really dealing with here?" She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's not just about the affair. It's about my own struggles and failures. I've been trying to find something to fill a void, and I made mistakes in the process. But I'm committed to changing, to working through this together." Her words were heartfelt, but they were not enough to erase the pain or the doubts. "I need to know if this is something we can truly work through, if we can rebuild the trust that's been shattered." Kendra nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm committed to us." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "I want to believe that we can make it work. I want to believe that we can rebuild what we once had, but I need to be sure that this is what we both truly want and need." Kendra reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Jason, I love you. I know I've hurt you, but I want to make this right. Please give us a chance." As I looked at her, I saw the pain and sincerity in her eyes. I knew that making a decision would require more than just emotions. It would require time, effort, and commitment from both of us. But I also knew that I couldn't make that decision alone. We needed to be honest with each other, to face the challenges together. "I'm willing to try," I said finally, squeezing her hand. "But we have to approach this with honesty and commitment. We have to be willing to face the difficult moments and work through them together." Kendra nodded, her eyes filled with relief and determination. "I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes." As we sat there, holding hands in the cafe that had once been a symbol of happier times, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, and there were no guarantees of success. But for now, I was willing to take that chance, to believe that we could find a way forward. The journey to rebuild our marriage would not be easy, but it was a journey I was willing to take, one step at a time. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos.